recently had an odd experience. When I told my friends, most of them thought I was straight up crazy. This happened late this summer. I'd woken up at about 5:50 a.m. on a Saturday. I knew I couldn't get back to sleep. There was just too much crap on my mind. It had been a really long week at work with a lot of stress, and I'd had some, well, shall we say, friction with my girl. So I went out for a drive to clear my head. Can't speak to those of you outside the Rockies, but if you live near the mountains, let me tell you, there's nothing quite like blasting some tunes and driving the mountains in good weather. And so, after minimal consideration, I threw on some metal and set off for a drive. It's actually really what I needed. A great start for the day. I got most of the way to Estes Park before I turned around and headed back home. Oh, the mountains were beautiful. The air was clean and crisp, especially for a July day. With the beautiful scenery, the music and RPMs really got the stress worked out. Sometimes just getting out and letting the miles peel by is exactly the kind of catharsis that you need. The drive got me pretty centered, and when I was back in the suburbs, I'd switched to some less intense music. It was Nightwish, I'm pretty sure. I was just kind of cruising along, not really headed back to the house in any specific way yet, just rather winding down after the drive. When I got back to the general area I lived in, and gotten off the main thoroughfares, I noticed there was a set of signs leading to a yard sale. Decided to go check it out on a whim. I honestly don't remember quite which neighborhood I wound up in when I stopped for the yard sale. I swear to God I wish I did. If I did, I could go back and ask some questions, but it's funny how memory works though. Well, funny in that Soviet Union, not everyone gets dark humor, just like food kind of way. Anyway, I stopped on the opposite side of the street from the yard sale, too close to a fire hydrant. That much I remember, for whatever it's worth. I got out of the car and strolled casually across the street. The yard sale itself was vaguely disappointing. Mostly porcelain chokes, clothes that went out of fashion in the 80s, and bad replicas of boring paintings. However, I was looking for something to buy. I wanted to scratch a whim, if you know what I mean. After a couple of laps around the sale, I noticed something that had passed my attention previously. It was a rag doll. Long black strands of yarn for hair. One red button and one black button for eyes, and a kind of Wednesday Addams dress. It also had one of those name tag stickers with Yvette scrawled across it in broken crayon print. Well, it was super creepy. I couldn't imagine that it was supposed to be anything else. That being said, it certainly had personality, and was on the cheap. So, lacking interest in any other options of things to buy, and kind of taken by the nobody loves me charm of the doll, I threw down the $3 they were asking for and carted my loot back to the car. On the drive back, I remember thinking, well, now that I bought it, what should I do with it? With no real answer in mind. Sadly, throw it in a dumpster fire didn't come to mind. Regardless, I got home, carted it inside, and kind of tossed it aside on the little circular table in the dining room niche off the side of the kitchen. It slid to a rest near the edge of the table, and probably would have remained there for some unspecified number of weeks before I decided to do something with it. Well, when I say probably, I mean certainly, but that's besides the point. However, it wasn't left up to my bad housekeeping habits to dictate, which is why I am here. Anyway, after discarding the doll on the table, I moved on to a more important matter, specifically lunch. I have no idea what I had for lunch specifically. Probably a sandwich and quite likely chips. Very likely chips. I have a particular weakness for barbecue flavor Lays. After I'd wrapped up lunch, I was washing the plate in the kitchen sink along with a few other things that had been sitting there. Washing dishes is kind of a mechanical task for me, and I was staring blankly out of the window in the kitchen. Not really looking at anything in particular, just zoning. My phone was in the living room, playing tunes from my playlist, loud enough to hear, but not quite loud enough to drown out the monotone hum of the AC. I probably wouldn't remember that any more than I remember lunch, but there was an oddity that occurred that made it stand out in my memory. Really, the entirety of the rest of the afternoon was strange enough. It's pretty cemented in my memory. But this was where it really started to stand out for me. I saw a SWAT van pass by, followed by what appeared to be a Benz S-Class, followed by a second SWAT van. I remember I stopped, hand submerged up to my wrist in a glass, my dead-eye gaze replaced with one of notable curiosity. I craned my neck to see if I could figure out where they were going through the dense trees. I don't know if there's anywhere where that would be a normal sight, but it was absolutely bizarre in my area. I live in a relatively secluded neighborhood that has plenty of land and plenty of trees. It's a good place to live. I couldn't imagine what would have needed not only one, but two SWAT vans. I mean, there's houses worth plenty more than mine further down the road, and money can equal trouble, but I don't think anyone has quite that much money in this neighborhood. Alternatively, they could have just been passing through, but it's enough of a detour to get anywhere useful. I couldn't imagine why they'd do it. Anyway, after pondering that for a couple of minutes, I put my hand out of the cup and went back to actually trying to clean it. The next big event of the day happened only a few minutes later. I'd finished washing the dishes and had moved on to rinsing them and stacking them in the rack to dry. I was about half done with that process when I heard a loud thudding at the front door, immediately accompanied by a commanding voice shouting, "Police, open up." I'll be honest, my first reaction was, what the hell? I mean, I'd seen SWAT drive by, so I should have consciously been aware of what was happening, but it seemed so outlandish to me to have the police at my door that it just didn't click. Honestly, it took me a moment to get my brain into working order enough to even realize I should probably respond. I was 3/4 of the way to the door when they started pounding and yelling again. I was half afraid to open the door, but I figured that they sounded sort of a little bit agitated, and leaving them to sit on the front stoop was unlikely to improve their attitudes, so I decided the best thing to do was to open the door. The rest of my day was, well, shall we say, a right proper cluster. However, if those SWAT officers were wearing body cameras, I really want the footage of when I opened the door. Not saying this was a pleasant experience by any means. I wouldn't want to go through it again, but I bet my expression was worth $1 million. The police were in full blacked-out armor, shotguns and M16s, and standing in the middle of them was a fellow who was apparently a priest, in long flowing robes, a tall funny hat, and, I swear, what appeared to be white body armor with red and gold trim. He was flanked on both sides by fellows who I assume were lesser members of the clergy, as their robes were less flowy, their bulletproof vests less ornate, and they were holding these incense censers. No joke. So, honestly speaking, I couldn't have given you a half a reason why SWAT would have been at my door, much less SWAT plus the bizarre combat cleric and his minions. I'm sure my face was the very picture of confusion. Anyway, I very rapidly found myself face down on the ground, with a bunch of heavily armored men in my front hall and a boisterous cleric liberally spritzing everything with what I can only assume was holy water, and loudly demanding I tell him where the hell form was. The entire time, the two minion priests were swinging the incense things and chanting in Latin, or at least I assume it was Latin. I didn't understand it, but really had other things on my mind and wasn't paying so much attention to them as to identify the language they were speaking. While I'd like to say I remained calm and tried to rationally tell them I had no idea what they were talking about, that would be a lie. I was mostly incomprehensible. I was stuttering so badly and tripping over my words so much. I suppose that will happen to you when you've got that many guys with that many big barrel guns who are that upset that you're not complying with their demands. The long and the short of it was, they were wanting information I didn't understand, and they didn't understand me in return because I wasn't particularly coherent. Good times to be had all around. If the problem hadn't more or less resolved itself, I'm not sure how everything would have turned out in the end. That aside, after what was probably a couple of minutes of their interrogation, one of them, a fellow carrying a shotgun, for whatever that's worth, shouted out, "Target located! Target located!" Considering he was just standing a few feet away from us, in the kitchen, I'm not sure why he felt the need to yell, but he wasn't asking for my opinion anyhow. The bulk of them then rushed into the dining room portion of the kitchen, leveled their weapons at the table, and started screaming things like, "Don't resist," or "On the ground." I couldn't see clearly what was going on from my vantage point on the ground, but it seemed as though the table had offended them greatly. Or at least, that's how it appeared to my adrenaline and fear-addled brain. I'm pretty sure that I yelled at them, telling them to leave my table alone, probably yelling at them to leave my table alone with some particularly colourful and spicy metaphors mixed in. Regardless, they ignored me. The battle bishop and his incense-spewing bodyguards advanced as well. When he started in with what I can only assume was a Latin mistration of some sort, and started aggressively splashing my dining room table with holy water, what might be the strangest thing of the entire day occurred. The room got cold. I mean, like, I could see my breath. Also, it got dark. Not nighttime dark, but more like overcast it might rain kind of day dark. Also, a distinct smell, like rot, started up. One of my friends had me smell rotting eggs, which apparently he let go bad for this express purpose. When I identified them as the same smell, he let me know it was brimstone or sulfur. So yeah, I'm sure all of this is terribly cliche, but what can I say? That's how it played out. Anyway, that all happened and, well, I'd thought the SWAT dudes were agitated before. They kicked it up several levels. There was a lot of screaming and swearing. Honestly though, that didn't seem to help much. The temperature kept decreasing, kept getting darker, and the smell got stronger and started mixing with the smell of burnt ozone. Then the priest kicked it up a notch too. He started belting out his mantra at a volume and intensity that would have made a South American soccer announcer proud. His two minions were responding back to his mandates with very nearly the same intensity. Then he pulled out what appeared to be a glass vial of holy water, smashed it on the table and dropped to his knees, thundering out such rapid-fire strings of Latin, I'd say he'd have had to have been fluent. His litany built into a frankly impressive crescendo, and then finished. Everything went quiet for about 30 seconds. Then the police again started screaming for the table to drop to the floor. Then, well, in a movie I might think this would have been obvious, but honestly I wasn't meta-analyzing anything at that exact moment in life. So yeah, the doll fell off the table. Basically, as soon as it started falling, it got warmer and brighter in the room, and the room went back to smelling heavily of incense instead of rot and ozone. Then one of the SWAT guys grabs the doll, stuffs it in a burlap sack that has crosses and Bible verses spray painted on it, and a lot of them double time it out of my house and speed off into the afternoon. I laid on the floor for a while, not finding that I had the energy to try and get back up. After a while, I gathered enough gumption to migrate to the living room. I sat down on the couch, contemplating the merits of getting blackout drunk, in the hopes that I'd forget the events of the day, and there was again a knocking at my door. I shuffled over to the door like some shell-shocked zombie and opened it to find a man with a really nice suit, really nice watch, perfect haircut, and a G-Series license plate on his car was standing at my door. It was at that point where I did either the most sensible thing I did that day, or least sensible thing, and I slammed the door in his face. He stood there and knocked for a while longer, and I ostensibly ignored him while pouring myself a drink or three. So, anyway, that's my story. If anyone out there has any ideas about what happened, or what a hell form is, or whether there is anything I can do about the fact I'm now noticing I'm being tailed by blacked out vehicles with G-series plates, well, I'm all ears. Hey there. Thank you so much for taking the time to drop by and listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me. I put a lot of time and effort into making these videos, so it's nice to know that there's someone out there listening. Do me a little favor, would you? Click that like button, leave a comment, and if you really feel like it, why not subscribe too? Okay, happy tales everyone. See you soon.